called The Gospel Witness. It is taken from Luke chapter 8, verses 26 to 39. So they landed in the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. As he stepped ashore, he was met by a man who was possessed by demons. For a long time he neither wore clothes nor lived, but stayed among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet. "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" he shouted. "I implore you, do not torment me." For Jesus was already ordering the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Many a time it had seized him, and then for safety's sake they would secure him with chains and shackles. But each time he broke loose and was driven by the demons out into the wilds. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied. This was because so many demons had taken possession of him, and they begged him not to banish them to the abyss. Now there was a large herd of pigs nearby, feeding on the hillside, and the demons begged him to let go into the pigs. So he gave them permission. The demons came out of the man and went into the pigs, and the herd rushed over the edge into the lake and were drowned. When the men in charge of them saw what had happened, they took to their heels and carried the news to the town and the countryside. And the people came out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at his feet, clothed and in his right mind, they were afraid. Eyewitnesses told them how the madman had been healed. Then the whole population of the Gerasene district was overcome by fear and asked Jesus to go away. So he got into a boat and went away. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go away with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Go back home and declare how much God has done for you." So the man went all over the town, proclaiming what Jesus had done for him. We follow with the second reading, the Epistle Witness, taken from Galatians chapter 3, verses 23 to 29. Before the coming of faith, we were all imprisoned under the power of the law, with our only hope of deliverance, the faith that was to be shown to us. Or to change the metaphor, the law was like a strict governess in charge of us until we went to the school of Christ and learned to be justified by faith in him. Once we had that faith, we were completely free from the governess's authority. For now that you have faith in Christ, you are all children of God. All of you who were baptized into Christ have put on Christ like a garment. Gone is the distinction between Jew and Greek, slave and free, male and female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. So if you belong to Christ, you are true descendants of Abraham. You are true heirs of his promise. And now we have the reflection, liberated for life.
Well, that story about Jesus with the man living amongst the tombs, who everybody thought was so crazy. What do you make of that story where Jesus heals him and the many demons somehow got into the pigs and they all go rushing down the hill into the lake? What a strange story. What do you make of that? We had working with us, or come up to work with us, at the time we were working with an Aboriginal community in the Kimberleys, and they had were setting their own cattle station going, and we were exploring having other economic enterprises, and one of our members of staff came from Maitland in South Australia. Now, he was up there to help with the cattle, but his family had pigs. Doug McCauley was his name. And he brought up 12 prized pigs to start our piggery. He was deeply offended by this story. And I don't think we could persuade him that the story of this significance is in the symbols. And that's how we're going to explore it. But there are some key words. Possession, naming, including the elephant in the room, oppression, liberation, offence, and presence. There's a flow through that story. And I start first with the word possession. The man living amongst the tombs was possessed, we are told, by demons. 6,000 demons, because that was the number of... Everybody knew what a legion was. It was 6,000 Roman troops. There were 4 legions to keep control in what was Palestine and what was then called Syria, part of the Roman Empire. I'll say more about that later. But in the world of the first century, mental illness was seen to be the result of someone's mind being possessed by demons. Now, what are demons symbolic of? Always destructive forces. Always that which prevents people from living their lives as free persons. That's what not being in one's right mind means. And people were therefore diagnosed as demon-possessed. Now, we in the 21st century know that mental illnesses have medical causes, and hence they're treated as such. And yet there's something of the same reality there. We can still say that people can be not in their right mind. And it also requires the right naming. A nephew of my wife, whom we ran into at the beginning of the year, was recently diagnosed as bipolar. And do you know what? That was a relief. It was a relief to him and to all his friends and family, because we all said, of course, Sean, that's Sean. And now he has the right medical treatment. He gets on with his life. He's in control of his life. And I've known others who have not been well, and quite often they've been bipolar. And I know they're well when they take their medicine. And I know they're not well when they don't take their medicine, because for some reason quite often some of my friends get intensely overly religious when they're not taking their medicine. But possession can take many forms. I think the common denominator is a loss of freedom, when people lose control over their lives. And there's many forms of that. And it's interesting that anything you value, and if it leads to overvaluing, that thing which you value can then somehow control you, possess you, rather than you be in control of it. And somehow it's always the good things. For example, we value our children. But sometimes we can so value them that we don't want to let them go. And we still want to mother or father them when they're well into their adult years. Or our job or vocation is something that's so meaningful to us and gives us such an identity that we struggle when we retire to let go. Now, that's not me, of course. That which you become attached to such a degree that you don't have enough detachment from it so that somehow it possesses you. And other things that give pleasure and relief, but can become addictions. I mean, the classic case is alcohol. Alcoholism is indeed a possession. Sometimes people can be attached to stories from their past. And I know people have some rather horrendous stories in their past. Traumatic. But they can't let go of them. They're still haunted by them. They're somehow still possessed by that which has been their bad experience in such a way that it still affects their present life. And they struggle with living in the present and facing their life's challenges. Now, I think all of us have at some time experienced moments of this. I had a funeral during the week, and one daughter of her mother who died, she said, I feel like I've gone into a cave. And I think we all know what that's like. There are moments when you go into a dark place because of what's happened to you. And you feel you've got no control over things, but mostly we come out of the cave. Although sometimes it requires someone else to name the situation correctly. Once someone said to me, Jonathan, you've got it wrong. You are not to blame. Because apparently I had a label on me that said blamed, and I couldn't see it. And I tell you what, it was a relief to know that, well, I need not to be victim to that situation in which other people were more responsible for what had happened than really myself. It's interesting how Jesus gets the possessive demon to name himself. Maybe all good counsellors know that sometimes if you're going to help someone sort themselves out, the person you're working with, the counselling, they have to name what it is that's wrong with them before they can move on. And of course, the demon's name is Legion, meaning so many things. And then we have, of course, that part of the story of the pigs. Now, what's that symbolic of? Well, pigs were symbolic, particularly for Jewish people, of all that's unclean. Now, in the region of the Gerasenes, of course, pigs weren't considered unclean because that part was settled by military people who'd done their time. They were really Roman citizens, and they had a different view of pigs, of course, a bit like my friend Doug up in there in the Kimberleys. But of course, for Jewish people, they were symbolic of all that was unclean. And it's as if cleansing, this man's cleansings, reverberated all around with all the other unclean things in the vicinity. It's as if all life-denying forces have to be dealt with. Getting rid of the grog bottles. Or as in AA, someone who's been set free from their addiction then goes and apologises to all the people that they've hurt. You see how there's that widening reverberation of bringing together all those who've been affected by what it is that's been the person's illness or addiction. Now, there's more to this story, because I think it alludes to things going on in the wider world which can affect us in our inner being. And again, the clue word is that word legion. Anybody hearing this story would have known that it meant that division of Roman soldiers, 6,000, who were so powerful that none could subdue them. A bit like the man amongst the tombs. Nobody could subdue him. And with the Roman legions there, nobody could subdue them because they were there to subdue the people. Symbolic of Roman imperialism. Destroying the hearts and minds of the colonised people. People interiorised oppression. And all forms of colonialism can do that to those whom they colonise. Many Aboriginal people in days gone past would talk about themselves. They talk about the big shame, which meant that they had interiorised the sense that somehow being black was being shameful. That had been put on them by those who had a different view of what colour meant. And the post-colonial struggle quite often has to do with the legacy of the colonial era. Now, this story, I think, is a bit like a political cartoon. And the Greek word, by the way, translated as herd for the herd of pigs, was the same word used for military recruits. You can picture it in the cartoon, rushing down the hill like troops in a battle, swallowed up in the sea like Pharaoh's army. You see how the symbolism can be played out? The fact was, the oppression of the Roman occupation made the social fabric sick, outwardly disempowered and inwardly sickened. And I think we sometimes can underestimate how we can be sickened or possessed by the oppressive social forces at play in the wider world. Do you remember the dread that was felt with the fear of nuclear obliteration in the 50s and the 60s? It was a real fear, and people internalised that fear. People were possessed by that nightmare. And of course it led to absurd amounts of money being spent on anti-missile missiles, right through to the Star Wars thing. And in the present, think how our society can be and is possessed by irrational fears. Just before Janine and I went away on our overseas holiday last year, we visited my mother's cousin, and if it's my mother's cousin, you'd know how old she was getting on in years. And we told her we were going to Morocco, and she said, "No, you can't go there, it's too dangerous. I even lock my doors here because I'm afraid of the Muslims." And we thought, in Strathalbyn? The tragic killing of Joe Cox in England, in an environment where people are possessed by irrational fears of others. Or, of course, the other tragedy of the last week, or the only other one highlighted, because there are even more than that, but the Orlando tragedy. Was it homophobia? Or was it Islamophobia? The challenge is to name the demons which possess individuals and society, and it's not always easy, even though the elephant in the room may be obvious. Do you remember? The reluctance to name the racism that was directed to Adam Goods. So, friends, naming the possessive forces opens the door for liberation and deliverance. Where the power of possession is called into question, when truth is so spoken that untruth has to flee. And it's beginning to happen in some ways. I think that the relationship between Indigenous people in this country and we of the wider society is on a pathway to healing as we recognise more the realities of what we've been reluctant to name in the past, including the frontier wars. But back to our story. Was this man's healing accepted, his rising up? Did people say, hooray? No, they didn't. They were afraid. They said to Jesus, "Go, get away from here. Don't do any more of this." Why? Is it because people feel they've been judged, found wanting as if they'd failed? Or is it because people can't really believe that people can change and be healed and rise up. And when it happens, it can be offensive. That episode in our life when we worked in the Kimberleys amongst an Aboriginal community when they were running their own cattle station, it was very successful, including the piggery. But do you think it made us popular in the wider community? It didn't. People in the West Kimberleys didn't like the idea, and they almost said it in so many words. They're getting proud and uppity, and we don't like it. And when some of the best stockmen came off their cattle stations to come and work on our own cattle station, which we're going to manage as well as run, it got us into trouble. I learned the hard way that empowerment is not always well accepted. Or is it because we can be frozen by fright of what Jesus can do through us? Personal freedom can be scary. But then what happened to the healed man? He wanted to leave his community and follow Jesus, but Jesus said no. He commissioned him to stay in his own community as a witnessing presence to the transforming Christ event in his life. Nothing more powerful than a living witness. And as I've said that this took place in Gentile territory, it reminds us that the liberating mission of Jesus takes place and must take place in the wider world beyond our walls. The liberation Jesus brings is a liberation for, as well as a liberation from. The healed man goes out and lives his liberation amongst his own people as a sign of the radical inclusivity of our common humanity. To refer back to our epistle reading, you remember where it says, "For you are all one in Christ Jesus, neither Jew nor Greek, slave or free, male or freeman or female," and when we would add it, I think Paul would nowadays, neither gay or straight. And so to conclude, friends, what labels can and do denote, well, while labels, let me go back a bit, while labels can and do denote the own differences amongst us and the differing moods that we can be in and our distinctive identities, and that's not all bad. The promise is, though, that we can be freed from them if they possess us. We too can proclaim what Jesus has done for us. And what is more, healing may come into our polarised world when we dare name the elephants in the room and point to the promise of the radically new inclusive society where all truly are the children of God. I think that's a good label. Loved, children of God, everyone.